Now, this is June Street where the alleged altercation occurred, and sources say Chris Brown spun out of control.
This happened to me, and it can happen to anybody. There are a lot of women who've experienced what I did.
I'm really sorry for what went down and what happened.
Now, most people know who Chris Brown is, one of the most recognizable voices in the music industry, who rose to fame as a teenager in the mid-2000s. Was started as a young, talented singer with a clean-cut image who captured the hearts of many, would later spiral into one of the most controversial chapters the music industry has ever seen. And it all traces back to one night in 2009, the night before the Grammys. In the middle of it all was Rihanna, a young Caribbean singer who moved to the United States at just 16 and quickly became one of the biggest pop stars in the world. Around that same time, she met Chris Brown, who was just 15 years old. What started as two teenagers crossing paths in the music industry eventually grew into what many considered a true power couple years later. Both were young, successful, and at the top of their careers, but behind the glamorous image, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. On February 8th, 2009, the night before the Grammys, 19-year-old Chris Brown and 20-year-old Rihanna left a Beverly Hills party in a rented Lamborghini. The two had been in a relationship for about a year and a half at that point, but that night, everything would spiral out of control. Minutes after they drove off, that Lamborghini became the scene of a violent altercation, one that would change both of their lives forever. According to police records and court documents later released, the argument started when Rihanna picked up Chris's phone and found a 3-page text from another woman. What happened next is Chris pulled the car over and tried to push her out, but the seatbelt kept her inside. He shoved her head against the window, leaving a visible swelling, and then struck her in the eye while steering with his other hand. Court documents say Rihanna began bleeding, with her clothes and the interior of the car stained during the assault. At one point, Rihanna pretended to call her assistant and said out loud, "I'm on my way home. Make sure the cops are there when I get there." This only escalated the situation. Chris allegedly became so furious that he threatened her life before resuming the assault. He then put her in a headlock when she tried to use the phone and bit her ear. Rihanna fought back, trying to defend herself, and Chris bit her fingers before letting go. The car eventually stopped in Hancock Park, Los Angeles. Rihanna grabbed the keys and screamed for help, but Chris continued to hit and choke her until she struggled to breathe. A neighbor heard the screams and called 911. When police arrived minutes later, they found Rihanna bruised, bleeding, and shaken. Chris Brown walked away on foot, but later the same day, he turned himself into the LAPD. 9 days later, according to police, Chris sent a text through Rihanna's assistant saying he planned to get help, but by then, the damage was already done. And when the photo of Rihanna's injuries leaked just days after, it put everything into perspective. That single image said more than any police report ever could. It showed just how serious the violence had been inside that Lambo. But then shortly after, in a surprising twist, reports surfaced that Rihanna and Chris had briefly reconciled. The two were spotted together in Miami at Diddy's house and later at a Beverly Hills hotel. Fans were furious. Petitions started circulating under slogans like "Don't do it, Rihanna," urging her not to get back with Chris. Still, prosecutors didn't need her cooperation to move forward. On March 5th, 2009, Chris was charged with 2 felonies, felony assault and a felony count of making criminal threats. In the weeks that followed, the case dominated headlines as the world waited to see how it would all unfold, and speculation grew about whether Rihanna would be forced to testify. Then 3 months later, on June 22nd, 2009, Chris Brown pled guilty to felony assault in a last-minute plea deal. By admitting guilt, he avoided a full trial and the possibility of Rihanna having to take the stand and relive the details in front of the whole world. The deal meant no jail time, but it came with strict conditions: 5 years probation, a year-long domestic violence prevention program, and 6 months of community labor. The second felony charge, making criminal threats, was dropped as part of the plea deal. He was also ordered not to have any communication with Rihanna for the next 5 years, which included phone calls and email contact. He wasn't able to come within 100 yards of her, or within 10 yards if they were at the same event. 2 months later, on August 25th, 2009, Chris was officially sentenced under the terms of the plea deal.
5 years probation and 6 months community labor for Chris Brown for his beating of Rihanna. The sentence handed down Tuesday by LA Superior Court Judge Patricia Sneg, as she also warned the R&B singer to stay away from his ex-girlfriend for 5 years.
Not long after, video surfaced of him in an orange vest doing roadside cleanup in Virginia.
Well, we've been hearing about Chris Brown sightings in the Richmond area for weeks, but here he is right now in the red hat performing hard labor. He's been clearing brush here at the Richmond police stables all day.
For many people, those visuals were a harsh reminder that no amount of fame could shield him from real consequences. But outside the courtroom, reality was setting in for Breezy, because while CB had avoided prison, His career was about to face its harshest test yet, and he knew it. Endorsements, public opinion, and even his place in the industry were suddenly on the line.
I have told Rihanna countless times, and I'm telling you today, that I'm truly, truly sorry, and that I wasn't able to handle the situation both differently and better.
In the weeks and months that followed, Chris Brown issued public apologies, saying he was sorry for what had happened and that he deeply regretted how everything went down. But even with those words, what happened happened, and the consequences for his career were not only immediate, but they were severe. Almost instantly, endorsements began to vanish. Wrigley, the largest manufacturer and marketer of chewing gum in the world, suspended its Double Mint gum campaign featuring Chris Brown. This was a major blow, since his 2008 hit Forever had been used as the jingle for the commercials. He also had a deal with the famous Got Milk campaign, but that partnership ended almost instantly. The company released a statement saying they took the allegations very seriously, and while his ad was already scheduled to end that week, they made it clear that they wanted to distance themselves from Chris as quickly as possible. The repercussions weren't limited to just endorsements. Chris Brown's music itself began disappearing from the radio. In the immediate days after the assault, several stations across the US stopped playing his songs, including stations in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and in Indianapolis. The backlash even spread internationally. In the Cayman Islands, broadcasters announced that they would no longer be playing Chris Brown's music until the case was resolved. And the fallout didn't stop with endorsements, sponsors, or the lack of radio support. It even reached the award shows. In March 2009, more than 10,000 fans, many of them parents, signed an online petition demanding that Nickelodeon remove Chris Brown from the Kids' Choice Awards. Facing massive amounts of pressure, Chris Brown himself eventually withdrew his own name from the ballot. By mid-2009, the impact of the case was very visible in Chris's music career. For Rihanna, however, she was thriving. That November, she released her album Rated R, her first project since the incident. It debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200 with 181,000 copies sold in its first week, a strong statement that her career and fan base were still very much intact. But when Chris dropped his own album Graffiti just 2 weeks later, the results told a different story. It debuted at number 7 with 102,000 copies sold, far below the expectations for a star of his level, a sign that the scandal had seriously damaged his ability to connect with the mainstream audience. Behind those numbers was even a bigger problem, however. His label had shipped 400,000 copies, but only about 40% of them actually sold. Retailers told Billboard that the album was simply not moving, with one executive bluntly admitting, "I wish I could return it." Frustrated, Chris went on Twitter accusing major retailers of blackballing his project and refusing to stock the album. But music industry insiders were telling a different story. Billboard and multiple chains, including Walmart and Best Buy, confirmed that Graffiti was stocked nationwide. The reality was harsher. The album was available everywhere, but fans just weren't buying it. Around the same time, Rihanna also broke her silence in an interview with Diane Sawyer. She admitted that she was embarrassed to have fallen in love with someone who had hurt her like that, and said reconciling with Chris shortly after the situation only added to that embarrassment.
Why be ashamed? Why would you be ashamed?
I fell in love with that person. That's embarrassing. That's embarrassing that that's the type of person that I fell in love with. So far in love. So unconditional that I went back.
More importantly, she explained that staying in that relationship would send the wrong message to millions of young girls who looked up to her. Her words made it clear that she was choosing strength and moving forward. Now, while Rihanna was on her journey of healing and publicly finding her strength, Chris was facing the steepest decline of his career. His once wholesome image was gone, and in the eyes of many, he was the face of one of the biggest scandals in music history. After the fallout, Chris began trying to repair his image and rebuild what he had lost. He went back into the studio, released new singles, and slowly worked his way back onto the charts. By 2011, it looked like the comeback was real. His album, Fame, Forgive All My Enemies, debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and even earned him a Grammy for Best R&B Album, a big victory for someone the world thought was finished. But even during his recovery period, Chris's personal issues were impossible to ignore. His temper and outbursts often overshadowed his music, and a famous example came in March 2011 on Good Morning America when he crashed out after an interview.
It's the interview that set off a firestorm.
Recently, the restraining order against you that Rihanna had issued has been relaxed. Have you all seen each other, been around each other?
I mean, not really. It's not really a big deal to me now as far as that situation. This album is what I want them to talk about and not the stuff that happened 2 years ago.
Chris Brown had agreed to talk about his past on GMA.
Chris was doing a live interview on Good Morning America when the host brought up the Rihanna situation. He was visibly irritated by the question, but kept his composure on camera. Once the segment ended, however, things escalated. Chris reportedly stormed backstage and shattered a window, leaving shards of glass on the New York sidewalk below. He later apologized, saying he felt blindsided by the line of questioning.
Although you can see me upset, I kept my composure, did my performance, and when I got back, I just let off like steam in the back. I didn't physically hurt anyone. I didn't try to hurt anyone. I just wanted to release just the anger that I had inside me.
Chris and Rihanna once again briefly reconciled between 2012 and 2013, even releasing music together again. But the backlash was massive. Fans, activists, people around her, and media voices all questioned Rihanna's decision. A lot of people felt like her getting back with Chris sent a conflicting message, and it sparked one of the loudest debates of her career at the time. Meanwhile, Chris kept making headlines for his behavior, and in 2012, he was caught up in a nightclub brawl in New York with Drake's entourage, reportedly sparked by tensions over Rihanna, since both of them had dated her. Then in early 2013, he was allegedly involved in yet another altercation, this time with Frank Ocean outside a Los Angeles recording studio. By October 2013, the spiral hit another low point. Chris was arrested in Washington, D.C. for allegedly punching a man outside the W Hotel. Because he was still on probation from the Rihanna case, this arrest put him at serious risk of real prison time. Desperate to show he was trying to change, Chris checked himself into rehab the very next day, but even there, his behavior was erratic, and shortly after, Chris got kicked out of the rehab facility after throwing a rock through his mother's car window after a joint counseling session. The following year, in March 2014, things only got worse. Chris was kicked out of a Malibu rehab facility where he was receiving treatment for anger management, substance abuse, and even issues tied to bipolar disorder, and was immediately sent back to jail. Although he was released in June of that year, by then it was clear that Chris Brown's name had become forever tied to scandals and controversy. Years later, Chris himself reflected on that night in the 2017 documentary, Welcome to My Life. He admitted that the relationship between him and Rihanna had become toxic, with constant fights, and that during the 2009 incident, he felt like a monster. He described being in shock after hitting Rihanna, saying the moment would haunt him forever. And looking back at the photo of her injuries, he admitted, "That's not me. I hate it to this day."
That's not me, bro. That's not me. Like, I hate it to this day. You know what I'm saying? That's gonna haunt me forever. I hated myself.
Despite everything that's happened, Chris Brown is still here. He's still a powerhouse in the music industry, still thriving years after stepping into the game as a teenager. And although he's continued to succeed in music, those words made it clear. Chris knows that one night will always follow him forever. No matter how successful his career remains, it's undeniable that one night in 2009 changed the trajectory of everything for Chris Brown. At the end of the day, this story shows how one violent decision can change everything, not just for yourself, but for the people around you. If there's one thing to take away, it's this: never put your hands on your partner. Violence has no place in a relationship, and if things ever start heading in that direction, the best thing you can do is walk away before it goes any further. Easier said than done, I know, but it's always the better choice every single time. If you made it this far, I appreciate you so much. Drop a like on this video. My name is Blacky Speaks. Nice to meet you. Any thoughts on the night that changed Chris Brown forever? Y'all let me know in the comment section below, and I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.